Thanks for joining me today for Status Sit. So, my goal with this is just to introduce you to a stillness practice. I don't think it's easy to adopt a sitting practice, a stillness practice by yourself. It took me years and years and years, um, mostly because the way that I was doing it, or I was doing it prior to any ability to communicate in the way that we have now. So lots of books and lots of reading, and it has had a profound effect on my entire life. And I cannot recommend it enough to the whole world. But it takes some effort, and it causes a lot of questions to come to the surface. So my goal here is just to kind of talk you through 15 minutes of it, see what you think, and maybe we'll do this on a regular basis. We'll see how it goes. I'd recommend that you start in a comfortable position. If sitting on the floor like this is not comfortable, it's really not worth it. If all you're going to do is think about when you get to stop, that's not what we're going for. So you really do want to make yourself comfortable. It's not a weakness thing. It's not oh, I'm not doing it the right way. This is mindfulness. This is you being present with your mind. There is no right way. I suppose there's a wrong way if you're not present with your mind. But even that is something kind of interesting to notice, that you can or cannot, or that you're having difficulty. And some days you will, and some days you won't. So the whole thing is experiential. It is an experience. No one can tell you what a banana tastes like. You have to eat the banana. And that's what that's what this is. You have to do it. No amount of reading or thinking will replace the sitting. So let's get started. Find a comfortable place. Sit on a chair. You can lie down on the floor if that's comfortable for you. If it's ideally, you may fall asleep. Ideally, we don't want to fall asleep because that's sleeping, and that's not. We're not quite as mindful when we're sleeping. But if you're tired, you're going to fall asleep, and maybe you need some sleep. So be kind. Adopt your sitting position, lying on the back, sitting up, sitting in a chair, sitting against a wall, sitting against a pillow. The way that my concept of front external lines and rear external lines developed was from my sitting practice, in needing to find a foundation for when I started. I'm going to set a timer. Needing to find a foundation for when I started. I would sit and it would be, what do I do now? It was hard. What am I supposed to think about? How am I supposed to breathe? And so my solution over many years became to settle into my body. And where there were aches and pains was where I directed my attention. And I started with my shoulders because it was so hard to sit up. And I thought, gosh, I really want to lift those shoulders. If I lift the shoulders, it seems like every force must have an opposing force. So I lift up on those shoulders. Maybe if I push down on the backs of the shoulders, that will help support the fronts of the shoulders. And for me, it worked. That's not to say it's going to work for everybody. But as that developed, I found that that helped all along the entire external lines of my body. So when I sit, it's one of the first things I do. Oh, my shoulders. My shoulders are always hunched forward. So I start running circles, inhaling up the feels to my shoulders, exhaling down the reels to my hips, inhaling up the feels, exhaling down the reels. If you feel silly closing your eyes, leave them open. Nobody is watching what you do. You're the only one that has to like what you're doing. And after a while, I would get tired because my shoulders, I'm trying to hold my shoulders up with my hips. So then I started running the circles in my hips, just up the hip to the hip bone, down through the butt cheeks, back around the front to the hip bones. So running circles can be a way of managing antsiness, managing a wandering mind. I don't believe that my goal here is to focus on nothing. That is what I've concluded over 25 years of personal practice. Others would argue. My own approach is to practice paying attention to what's going on in front of me. And you might say, well, nothing's going on in front of me. Well, I have all kinds of body sensations. Some of them are pleasant, some of them are painful. Those are going on. Focusing on those is focusing on what's happening to me right now. Focusing on pain helped me to engage into the present a little bit better. Wow, that pain I'm feeling, there's tension in my left upper back. What does it feel like? Maybe it travels. Mine travels up into the back of my head. Sometimes that sparks memories. That gets tricky. But you can run off the rails with the memories. And these are things you learn to manage. There's some validity to the memory, and the memory being associated with some kind of physical sensation. And at some point, there's a recognition that the mind is going round and round and round. At some point, it's not productive. And it calls me back to the present. Or my body calls me back to the present. My body gives me a sharp jolt of pain in my back again. Oh, yeah. The position starts to get uncomfortable. Movement during a stillness practice is also something that's debated. The late monk Thich Nhat Hanh used to equate movement with a glass of pond water. And he would describe how if you scoop the pond water into a glass, it's murky and muddy, and you let it sit still. And it becomes crystal clear, and all the dirt sifts down to the bottom. There is a clarity, an internal clarity that you begin to notice with stillness. But the clarity is the fruit of the stillness. If stillness is so painful that you're not still, that you're constantly thinking, and that the experience is a miserable experience, then it seems logical to me to move, to get comfortable, so that you can find a level of calm, clarity. Again, some would argue you would take your position and you don't move. I've had a pretty steady mindfulness practice since I was about 22, which brings us to 32 years. In 32 years, every single thing that I learned or that I picked up seems to be a melding together of a lot of different opinions and ideas and things I've read and people I've talked to, that finally I don't know what the word is, alchemized, concentrated into something that worked for me. I have a lot of faith in this practice, but I've always been a skeptic, and it needed to work for me or I couldn't continue with it. Which is a long way of saying you may need to experiment. You will. It's worth it. But it is a practice. We've reached the end of our time. Thank you for joining me. If you have any thoughts on this, was helpful, wasn't helpful, don't talk so much, talk more. I'd be very curious to hear what you have to say. Please feel free to leave a comment. Thanks again for joining me. Namaste.